Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and this is another episode of Motivational Mondays. I'm really excited today to speak to this young lady, Kyleigh Leddy. She's a graduate of Boston University and is currently pursuing her degree at her MSW at Columbia University in Advanced Clinical Practice and Public Policy. Now, in 2019, she won the New York Times Modern Love College Essay Contest for a piece about her grieving her sister, Kate, and she has an amazing new book out now, or it's coming out, I believe, soon, and it's called The Perfect Other. And it's just a fascinating book. I'm happy she's here to talk about it, so I will bring her on now. Kyleigh, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we are excited you're here too. And first, I want to begin by saying thank you for sending me the book. And also, you are so kind, a lovely handwritten note. Like, who does that in 2023? So, you are the real deal, sister.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. I'm glad it got you. I was kind of nervous, so I'm very
No.
comforted you have it.
Yeah, no, I got it. And I was like, I researched too, just in case I didn't get it in time. And so I got it kind of late, but I'm almost finished. So, I mean, I make like three chapters left. So I got you here today.
You're a
So
fast reader.
I am. Well, we spoke a little bit off camera about it's a subject that is dear to me as well. And so what I want to just do is set up a little bit of the book and then have you sort of give your summary of it. But I love that your book opens up beautifully about a little girl who begs and hopes for a little sister. And you say this little girl willed you into existence, which I just thought was so, poetic and beautiful, how you phrase that. And then, of course, she gets her little sister, you, and life is seemingly going wonderfully with all the promise you'd expect for two daughters. And then things take a difficult turn for your sister. So to begin, can you summarize the story that you share in your book, The Perfect Other, and also explain the meaning behind that title, that choice to call it that?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you again for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And also just knowing that, you liked that sentence and that spoke to you, it means a lot. So the book really focuses on my relationship with my sister, who was 6 years my senior. So that opening scene right there is her as a little kid. I think she's like 6 years old, maybe 5 years old. And she would stop, and every time my parents would drive by a church, she would be like, "Stop the car, I want to go in." And then she'd go into the church and like sit down and try to like pray for little sister. So I always say, like, not only was she like begging my parents, she was literally willing me into existence. And I think for me, like, that's just like, I recently wrote a New York Times article kind of about sibling loss too. And just, I think it's kind of underspoken about in some ways, because these are people who, like, they form you in a sense. You grow up with somebody and they shape every aspect of who you are. So I really wanted to include that. But yeah, going back to kind of just like overview of the book in general, it's really about our relationship, her struggles with mental health, her eventual diagnosis of severe mental illness with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And then kind of the other side of that, just, how to recover from that and going through grief and loss kind of at a pretty young age, and kind of managing that and figuring out a way to do something productive with it.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering too about that because when when I was reading it, it felt like there were some moments where maybe your family, you're still grieving with or grappling with the idea that you missed signs of
Mm-hmm.
things, that maybe behavioral things that were just dismissed as the angst or musings of a teenager, which, we were all pretty much rambunctious to a degree as teens, but um, it feels like you sometimes are grappling with that we missed things that were showing us that there was more there. But I do wonder, did this help? Writing this book, did it help you cathartically maybe move beyond that sort of sense of guilt? Because no one can blame anyone sometimes for these situations; they just happen. So, were you able to get past that? Did the book help or not?
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a line in the book, and I'm probably paraphrasing myself here. I don't know if this is even right, but I say something like, grief is the cousin of regret. And just like, I think when you lose somebody, it's so natural to start thinking about everything you could have done differently. And when you lose someone to suicide, especially the way I did, I think it's the most natural thing in the world to look back and see all the signs you missed and what we could have done differently and like how this happened. So in some ways, I think of the book as like an investigative piece, because I'm going back almost like it's a mystery and trying to unravel what went wrong and like all these factors that go into these really complex mental health issues. In terms of being cathartic, though, I really do think it was. When I was writing it, people would say that to me. Like I'd have like friends and family say like, "Oh, this must be so cathartic for you," and I would get really upset because I'd be like, "It's so hard. Like this is like the worst time in my life." Like actually writing it was harder than living through it in a lot of ways for me. Just because I think when you're trying to survive, you're just on this like default survival mode versus when you're trying to make sense of something retroactively, you have to use like higher processing cognitive abilities, and actually going through and like looking at everything was so hard. And I think it was like grieving again. So writing it was like the worst thing in the world. Then it came out, and now it's been like incredibly cathartic, and I feel like it's like closing a chapter on it. I feel so much more healed. I feel so much more at peace with the story, and also just knowing that people now are like getting to know my sister and her story is helping people. I mean, that's the kind of legacy I know she would have wanted. So that means a lot to me.
Yes, that's important too, because your sister, she begins as this vibrant, vivacious, and beautiful is the term that she's always described as, pretty, very pretty. And is that her on the cover, ghosted in the image on the front cover?
Yeah, that's one of her modeling photos.
Yeah, I mean, I literally thought that was Karolina Kokova, the like supermodel. So she definitely
Yeah.
was a good looking woman. But I just think that sometimes maybe society traps women in that moniker.
Mm-hmm.
And I do wonder, as I read about her, if she sometimes initially rebelled to be the bad girl because it was the antithesis of what was expected of her. Have you ever thought on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point for sure. There was a part of her that was so angelic looking. Like she had just like the most beautiful, like cutest little face. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that people have expectations of that. I think in a lot of ways it also shielded her from kind of how bad things were getting, because she could still model, like she was modeling full time, and like people would see her and it would attract attention, and almost like a lot of the behavior she was exhibiting maybe were looked past because she didn't present that
Mm.
way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that plays into like sort of like the stereotype that pretty girls get away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
And it's true.
and
Like,
she
yeah, I mean,
did.
society. Yeah, I mean, but I think society in general. I mean, that's a thing. We see it all the time, where sort of like quote unquote the beautiful people are willing to look past a lot of things, and maybe that's to the detriment of the person, because the person actually needed someone maybe to step in. In fact, there's a point in your book too that I love, where you it was a pretty funny, almost pro-feminist statement, where you were saying how you refer to your own sister all the time as pretty, 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 as the main moniker that you would address her as. But there was like, she could have been, you could have given her some kudos for how well she packed the luggage in the back of the family, the family trunk when she went on vacations. Like the nuances like that, I think maybe people don't realize. People might just want a little pat on the back for simple things. You never know in life. It's really strange.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like a pretty early scene I think I described when we're pretty young, and I'm like this little sister just idolizing her, and in some ways like objectifying her by doing that, because I'm talking about her beauty and like the things that I look up to, or that I want to be like, or like her fashion style or this and that. And she was that person. But at the same time, she kind of calls back at me and she's like, I'm more than that. And I think like that's kind of me holding myself accountable as much as possible in the book, of like my perspective is inherently flawed in a lot of ways because I'm glorifying her as a little sister. And like I think for me too, like I really wanted to get other people's perspectives in the book too, like her high school friends. I talked to some people who knew her during that time in a way that I couldn't have known her, or like the stories they would tell me about her and like all these other qualities. And I think in the act of writing a book about somebody who's passed and trying to capture them, it's so challenging. And I wanted people to like really like get to know her and like have her legacy live on. That was such a big part of my impulse for writing it. And but also knowing inherently like that's going to be flawed, and I can't capture her. And that always kind of, you know, it's always going to be a failing of some sort.
Well, what I think is really fascinating too is the titling of the book, The Perfect Other.
Mm.
It's, to me, there's almost like a dichotomy there, where I don't know if it's necessarily just her you're referring to there. It's almost like there's two of you being referenced in that. But I would love for you to share, like, what did you mean behind that title, The Perfect Other?
Yeah, I just realized I missed that second half of your question earlier.
Oh no, that's okay. Look, that's why I'm here.
That's a really good question.
No worries, no worries.
Keep me on track. Yeah, no, that title, I think it's really important to me because, like you said, it's the dichotomy of she's this perfect figure in some ways, like I'm glorifying her and all these different character traits she has. She's hilarious, she's funny, she's smart, she's beautiful, she is like very popular, well-liked person. At the same time, she's othered by the sense that she has this really misunderstood disease that she's struggling with, and this brain-based disorder that people don't understand. I really don't think people understand it, like, to this day very well. But at the same time too, like, the other half of that is that she's the perfect other version of me. Like, we're two sisters in that sense, there's two halves. And that, for somebody to have all these like privileges that she had. I mean, she's white, she's like middle class, resources, beautiful, like she's just all these things that she had, like, kind of like in her favor, like a family who wanted to get her help, the resources to get her help, or like that we could call the police and we weren't worried about her safety as much. Like, I mean, those are huge. I mean, that's like kind of like the point of the book, in my opinion, is like, look at all these things that were stacked in our favor and we still couldn't save her. So what happens to everyone else who doesn't have those privileges?
Yes. I'm so happy you brought that up, because my follow-up was referencing the part in your book where you mentioned that. You say, we had all these resources. You mentioned the awareness of the privilege you had, which and thank you for that, because it's not a bad thing when people of color ask people who are not people of color just to understand that there's already a built-in system in place that favors them. So it's less difficult for them in many situations. So thank you for that acknowledgement. But you mentioned marginalized groups, people of color, the LGBTQ, like people who don't have a lot of money. Like, what happens when they have these issues that you all had in your family with limited resources, if any, at all?
Yeah, exactly. And I think
Terrifying.
it's so terrifying. I think it's a lot of the issues we have in our society stem from people not getting mental health treatment or not having like the resources to actually, like, just try to, like, I don't know, just take care of themselves. And I've worked in homeless shelters, I worked in group homes, and I've just seen people struggling with like pretty similar symptoms that my sister struggled with, and having no support systems. And I that's probably why I wanted to get my MSW at Columbia, was just so I can like zoom out more. Because I look at my sister, and if we went there to get her an apartment so she could live by herself, because she couldn't live with her roommates. Like, she tried, and
There were quite a few incidents there. Yeah.
yeah, like if we, like, my parents were able to like get her a rent in an apartment, like that's that's huge. Or like to get to treatment homes or go to the hospital systems, or like everything that we try to do to help her, like, people, I mean, that amount of money we invested in that. I mean, for us, it was a struggle. Like, we talked about my college tuition, or like, what are we going to do with, like, supporting our family? And we had the resources. So it's unbelievable how, I think, prevalent this is in society, and the lack of systems we have to support people. Because my sister would have been homeless, I think, like, if she didn't have, our support. Yeah, she couldn't hold a job down. And I think she would have been, she had a lot of, conflict with law enforcement officers, where she's, so in the middle of psychosis that she's threatening them or like spitting in their face. Like,
Right.
what if she wasn't a pretty white woman? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Listen,
it's so true.
absolutely, sister. You are,
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. You're really, I mean, if at that level, you had it that extreme, you're right. People who
Yeah.
don't have those attributes happening for them, there's almost like no hope for them for sustenance. Like, they would have never lasted that long in most cases. And I think for me, I mentioned to you off camera that I have a family member who also has dealt with schizophrenia for a long time. Wonderful person when they're on their meds, and they are
Right.
consistently doing that, which is wonderful. So I haven't had incidents in a while, a long time, but I know those episodes, and they can be really terrifying. And we had the resources as well, thank goodness, to make sure the hospital bills were taken care of, and
Right.
all that. But I do think there should be some outreach, though. Um,
Mm,
Especially in places like New York City and Philadelphia, where you were living for a long time, we
right.
see the mentally incapacitated people on the streets with no
Hmm.
help at all. So hopefully, I don't know, things will get better. Fingers crossed. Do
Yeah.
you see it getting better in your line of work at all, or any efforts being made to sort of at least acknowledge that we need to do better in society?
I see the mental health conversation increasing drastically. And I mean, even from the past 6 years, from, I guess, oh my gosh, maybe 8 years now, So my sister passed to modern day. I mean, I think we're talking about it more, but a lot of times we talk about like mental health in terms of kind of like your mental wellness. So like
right,
we all
sure.
struggle with like self-care and this and that. And those are really,
Stress. Right.
yeah. And I talk about that in the book in terms of me, like that's totally a very important part of the conversation. But like severe mental illnesses where someone's experiencing like
The psychosis
brain-based,
and
yeah, delusion, psychosis. And like, I don't know if we're talking about as much. I think for me, like, that's why I want to put this book out there as like, I think, like, I kind of feel like people going through it in this moment are probably just like in this survival state again, like we were, where they can't really maybe go out and say like, my sister has this, my daughter has this. Like they're just trying to keep everyone safe and well and on medication. And
yeah.
you know, so I think for me right now, like the fact that my sister is gone, unfortunately, it's kind of like we have no one left to protect. So I just felt we had this obligation to speak up and just say something, hoping that by the more we talk about it, the more we can actually invest in the resources to address the problem.
And I think with that too, the examples you gave of people who aren't really talking about it, yes, there's a degree where they are just so inundated with it that they don't have the bandwidth, but there's also the stigma, right? There's also the fear. And what I love about your book too is it humanizes someone who had this issue, because you also show that your sister was a beautiful person. She had dreams. I love I hate giving books away, you know, stuff, but I have to reference a part where, you know, it's one of the most harrowing parts in the book where she goes missing and you go to the apartment with your mom and you get the laptop and, but you know, there's notes your sister was writing where she was trying to get better, or she had an idea of who she wanted to be if she could just control this thing. She was aware. And I thought that was really a humanizing way to present her. She wasn't just someone out there beyond reach. She just knew she had a mental incapacitation, and she was hoping to try to grasp it, but it just overcame her ultimately. Is that a proper assessment, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on. And I think that's the hardest part about losing someone to something like this is that like she would, you know, kind of go away and then she'd come back again. And then she'd be my sister and she'd want a hug and she would like, you know, and it's, oh, Kate's back. And then it'd be a second later, like she's now gone again. And it's just, it's so hard. And I also think there's a part in the book I talk about too, which I don't think I knew about in the moment, because a lot of the problems with me writing this book too is I was so young when a lot of these events were happening. So
the
I relied,
recall is trying to, yeah.
that plus the trauma, the memory, it's like, ugh, it's a mess. So I talked to my mom a lot about, you know, going through these memories and looking through records and piecing it together. And she told me that, you know, Kate really wanted to be a spokesperson for this. Like they would have these conversations one-on-one together where Kate would say like, yeah, like I want to like spread awareness. I want to do this. And I want to help people. And then she couldn't do it. She couldn't manage herself day to day. So I think like part of what was special about me writing this book was that I felt like we were kind of like doing that together a little bit. And I could, in some ways, like help her fulfill that dream.
Yeah. Well, even why, again, with the title, it's funny when people think of a memoir, they think that it's a memoir about self. And this is a very unique one because it's a memoir about my sister. And when I read it, it feels like you are so consciously and beautifully giving her that presence and giving her life as a fully dimensional character, not just a woman who committed suicide who was sick, right? I mean, there's this vibrant, textured story you tell about this person. And that is why I think it's going to resonate with people who are going probably in their own family dynamics. They're going to say, hey, that's my cousin. That's my aunt. That's my uncle. That's my mother or father. I recognize all that. So that to me is the powerful part.
Oh, thank you.
How you're telling a story. You're welcome. And I also want to talk to you about something clinical where you draw parallels between concussions, head injuries, potentially impacting mental incapacitation, especially in people who already are predisposed to things. So share a little bit about your thoughts on that, because your sister had, a couple injuries, I think, but one was really bad. I think you detailed she falls off of like a step or something and has a concussion.
Yeah. She had a few just like, you know, concussions here and there when she was younger in her teenage years. A lot of them were a result of her partying and being reckless and sneaking out of our house and like falling off chairs. Like, so some of those, but they were less, you know, traumatic. But she had one when I think she was 18 or 19, and she was a freshman in college, and she was at Drexel University in downtown Philadelphia, and she was on a stoop of a brownstone.
Yeah.
And
And
the
they're
way I've
high.
been
They're really up there, those brownstones.
exactly, and I think the way I've been told is that a man she was friends with like gave her a hug, and he was like heavier than her, and she just toppled over, and she ended up cracking her head on the concrete. So from there, I mean, it was like she was put in a medically induced coma. She was taken to the hospital. She was like in intensive care for a while. I don't think she came to for like 3 days. And then when she did, the doctor told my mom and I that she's not going to be the same when she wakes up. Like this is going to have an effect. It's a traumatic brain injury. She has like staples in the back of her head. She had bleeding in her brain. But he didn't tell us like obviously what that meant because he didn't know because you can't predict these things.
Right. You can't predict to what degree the person has been altered, right?
Exactly. And I think for us, there's a part of us that we're like, she's struggling right now. Like she's like, we don't have a diagnosis, but she's acting out and she's acting a little irrational and she has mood swings. Like maybe this is, it would be so bad if she has some like, sense knocked into her. But it's not.
Right. Well, is that but also in the book, is that the moment where like, you're like being conscious with your mom, like not to upset her, not to like be crazy. And the first thing she says to you is like, your hair looks a mess or something.
Yeah.
And you were like, well, you don't look so great yourself. And in that brief moment, it was like you had your sister back kind of.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny.
It was totally the sister dynamic of like, I hadn't washed my hair in a few days because I was at the freaking hospital, for
Exactly.
her. And then she wakes up and she's like, "Ugh, your hair looks so greasy." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me right now?" I've been like crying, worried about you.
That's funny.
But yeah, it's like, I think when we looked at kind of like the records, I looked at the records, the hospital records and everything else after the fact, it got really worse. And I think within a month she was kicked out of school and like she was back home and she was like really struggling. So at the moment we couldn't see anything like that. It was just too close to the picture. But zooming out, I mean, I don't know what effect that had. I don't know, like, that's the age range where like schizophrenia typically develops anyway. So it's just hard to draw conclusions, but definitely didn't help. And I think like traumatic brain injuries are another part that of the mental health conversation that isn't really talked about enough. And I mean, I think like even like when I was working in a homeless shelter, I remember the statistic that like, I think it was 25% of people experiencing homelessness had traumatic brain injury. So it's like, I mean, yeah, like these things it's a huge problem. And I don't know if we've like really caught up with the science or how to deal with this yet.
Well, the connection though that people can identify with who might be listening or watching this is the conversation that's around the NFL all the time.
Right.
Where it could be coincidence, but there's some bad incidents occurring with NFL players who have documented head traumas because of all the years of playing, the hits they've taken. And so, there very well could be that correlation. And I think, when you put things in sports terms, people tend to take them more seriously, maybe.
There's a New York Times article that I talked about in the book, and I think the title is roughly like 111 NFL players' brains were analyzed and 110 had CTE. Wow. So, and that's something you can only diagnose with once someone's passed away and you have access to the brain. So, I mean, we don't know what's happening in real time, and it's scary, and I think it's very relevant.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, because there could be, something that we're clearly overlooking and not seeing about this that can help us understand it better. I do wonder as well, your mom is such an amazing presence in this whole process. You reference her in the book, obviously, a lot, and your father too. What did your family think about you wanting to write this book? Was that a conversation you had to have first with them and be like, are we going to do this? And if we do it, how are we going to do it?
Yeah. So the way the book came about was a little like unorthodox too, I think. I was a senior in college and I'd always dreamed, like my college admission essay is me being like, I want to study English and psychology and write a book about this to like spread awareness. But I was thinking like I would go the PhD route, or like, I always thought too, like no one actually gets a book published. It's an impossible dream. Like I've just been told time and time again, it's impossible to make it as a writer. So I went to college and I really kind of put the writing aside, and I was studying clinical psychology, doing a thesis. I was accepted to Columbia's master's program. And then I was in a writing class for fun, and this professor told me that there was a New York Times contest that was accepting college submissions. So I had an essay I wrote for that class, and the teacher bless her.
Mm-hmm.
I love her.
They
We talk
know,
all
they
the time.
know. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
She told me to submit an essay I'd written for class to the contest. I had like never submitted anything before, really. I'd won like one essay contest in high school and like wrote one short story under a fake name in college. And so I just submitted it just totally on a, you know, whim. And I ended up winning the contest, which was like a 0.01% odds. I found
Wow.
out that I won on my sister's birthday week. So
Wow.
that was a little like, ooh. And after that, it came out my senior week of college, my like last week for graduation. It just changed my life overnight. I had agents reach out to me. I just kind of
Oh
got
my
together
gosh.
all these documents I had. And like, I remember it was like, we had like senior week where we're like going on like boat cruises and stuff and like all these parties planned. And I'm like sending off like emails to agents in the corner. Like it was like nuts.
I love it. I love it. Don't sacrifice the party though. Right.
Yeah,
But still take care of your business. Right. Yeah.
You can do
Amazing.
both.
Yeah, you
But
can. Amazing.
but so I ended up like kind of getting the book deal that fall with HarperCollins. And you know, it became this conversation with my parents where like it was thrust upon us. We didn't have time to really think in a sense. Like it was, this is being published in the New York Times in a couple weeks.
You have to move fast with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
And,
Yeah.
and the New York Times has a lot of eyes on it. I think that column has like 800,000 readers. Like it's going to be this story that we've kept so private and we've been so sensitive about, even within our small circles, like family and friends. I mean, now it's coming out to this big audience. So it was really scary for us. But I just, and my mom and my family, they were so great about me doing this. I think we were all nervous, but at the same time, I just felt this huge compulsion that I've never felt in my life before, where I was just so sure of it, where I was like, I have to write this book. I have to get this story out there. I have this platform now given to me. Like, what am I going to do with it? And I want to tell people about this. And I really want to help people not feel alone. So there was never a moment that I felt like we shouldn't do it. But in between, there was a lot of fear. And, you know, even still now, I mean, it's odd I'm 26 now, but I was 22 when I read the book. It's odd just having this like really personal story out there and people can Google you. And I think we're still grappling with what that means.
Well, thank you for that. And we appreciate what you do. And I personally appreciate the story, as I mentioned, because I have a personal connection to it myself. And so we are happy you were here today. Kyleigh Leddy, author of The Perfect Other. Now, is it out yet or is it coming out soon?
It's out now.
It is out now. Okay, so guys, please make sure you check out this book. It's wonderful. And thank you for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you, Corey. It's been a pleasure.